Welcome friends. So, as we have been talking about in one of our earlier classes, today's focus is on Iranian cinema. We will be talking about cinema from Iran. Okay, one of the greatest cinema, one of the best cinema in contemporary times. It comes from cinema, it comes from Iran, and it has won the major film awards all over it keeps on winning the major film awards all over the world. So, Iranian cinema. Now, how many of us are aware of filmmakers from Iran? Here are some of the major players here. Dariush Meherjoui, one of the earlier filmmakers from Iran. Mohsen Makhmalbaf, and also his very talented daughter Samara Makhmalbaf, who made a movie called The Apple when she was just 18. The Apple is about a group of young girls who are kept in seclusion by their patriarchal families, and they are allowed to come out only when they are grown up. After that, it is their attempt to get adjusted or accustomed to the society. So, that is The Apple by Samara Makhmalbaf, Mohsen Makhmalbaf's daughter. Majid Majidi, Abbas Kiarostami, of course, he needs no introduction to people who are into cinema, and the very controversial Jafar Panahi. Among the first Iranian film that was shown internationally was Dariush Meherjoui's 1968 film The Cow. The Cow is about a farmer in a village from Iran who loses his beloved cow, and then he misses it so much that he starts assuming the identity of the animal and ultimately goes insane. Iranian cinema experienced considerable growth after the Islamic Revolution of 1978 and 1979. Still in 1983, a cinema foundation was established to encourage films with Islamic values. So, that is one of the key concepts that we will be talking about. Iranian cinema, the rule of modesty, the role of modesty, role of women in Islamic cinema, the village films, the new Iranian film wave, those are the key concepts that we would be talking about. Now, as a result of adherence to or insistence on Islamic values on screen, earlier there were some restrictions, and now after the revolution there was major insistence on Islamic values, but still by and large filmmakers were free to make the kinds of film they wanted to do, and freed from the burden of the past, especially the Shah regime. New directors such as Makhmalbaf and Kiarostami emerged with a different kind of cinema. So, rule of modesty, they have to observe, they have to adhere to the rules of modesty. See, we have been talking about eyeline matching shots in cinema, that is conventional cinematic language. In the language of cinema chapter or lecture, we have been talking about all these things. So, there is something called eyeline matching. A man looks at a woman looks back, and they smile, and we know that is falling in love. But in Iranian cinema, for obvious reasons, these things cannot be shown on screen. So, directors had to reinvent the conventional cinematic language, and they do these things in a number of ways. So, how they do it, that is another area of discussion altogether. Right now, I am just trying to give you a quick overview to some of the exemplary Iranian films. Now, there is a film called, it is a Jafar Panahi film, The White Balloon, where we find a little girl Razia, and her father is absent throughout the film. We see the characters observing the rules of modesty on screen, where men and women do not make any physical contact with each other. So, this is one example that you keep referring to the father, but he is absent throughout. So, the child talks maybe to the mother or just to the father, but both parents will not be seen on screen exchanging looks as would be so common in other parts in cinema from other parts of the world, because that is how it is in Iran. Now, modesty laws also ensured that women must be veiled in all circumstances. Following the codes of modesty, Iranian filmmakers resorted to rethink cinematic language. They did this by using allegorical figures and resisting cinematic closures. Now, Iranian cinema blends documentary with fiction and encourages the audience to consider the relationship between what is fiction and what is real. It is also marked by an abundant use of color. Color is extremely important to express emotions, and also sweeping landscapes and country life. So, those are the common features of Iranian cinema. Village cinema is also extremely important. Cinema has been relocated from cities to the countryside. A significant feature of Iranian cinema is its setting. 90s onwards, the filmmakers have become preoccupied using actual villages and village locations rather than the urban settings. This helped avoid the rule of modesty in dress, where peasant women can be shown wearing large outer garments and covering their heads with scarves. Otherwise, with city women, you cannot show these things, it would be very unrealistic. That is not the way women are in the cities of Iran, but they had to show it on screen in a certain, women have to be representative on a screen in a certain way, and they could be realistic with women covering their heads and wearing large oversized outer garments only in rural settings. Now, new locations also enabled the filmmakers to experiment with new techniques such as the use of mobile camera, natural light and natural sound. The films are also increasingly self-reflexive in nature concerning the role of cinema in producing the social world. Like the French Nouvelle Vague films, the new Iranian films generally follow one character and make us watch the social spectrum through his point of view. There is also the feminist question. Iranian feminism interrogates the question of chastity and virtue in women, although it is done in a very subtle way. The new filmmakers constantly attempt to present women in a more realistic light. Still, the representation of women remains problematic, with women as fetishized spectacles on one hand and as domesticated housewives on the other. It is difficult to, but still with all their constraints, they do try to interrogate the patriarchal values and raise certain important feminist questions. Mohsen Makhmalbaf's Gabbe is a movie that raises certain feminist questions. It is a magical and visually rich film set in the countryside. The protagonists are an old man and his wife. They have a richly colored carpet that they cherish. Suddenly, a beautiful young woman called Gabbe, she appears before them. She has woven the carpet and is the spirit of the carpet. So, the film uses color, character, fantasy, magic realism, reality, spirituality to cover or to unravel the mysteries of love, family and traditional rituals. Here is a scene from Gabbe. Makhmalbaf's Kandahar, it is a 2001 film. It combines actual documentary footage with a fictional narrative to show us the horrors of a land ruled by fundamentalists who use religion to suit their own worldview. The protagonist here is Nafas, a woman born in Afghanistan, but who flees to Canada and she becomes a successful reporter. She returns to her former homeland rather, to find her sister who lost her legs to a landmine explosion. As Nafas explores her way through the country, we get glimpses of a land ravaged by war, poverty and immense suffering. Many of us would be reminded of Buñuel's surrealism when, in a scene in Kandahar, artificial legs are airdropped from a helicopter to a makeshift medical center in Afghanistan. So, the screen is covered with limbs dropping, the artificial legs being dropped from a helicopter the middle of a medical facility in Afghanistan. Okay. Very surreal. Now, Abbas Kiarostami, he founded the film department of the Institute for the Intellectual Development of Children and Young Adults, where a number of the highest quality Iranian films were produced. He ran the department for 5 years and at the same time directed his first film, Bread and Alley, in 1970. Making educational films for children at Kanun, a non-commercial organization, helped him with his basic approach to cinema. He was awarded the Palme d'Or, a Golden Palm Award at the Cannes International Film Festival for his film Taste of Cherry in 1997. Although Kiarostami made several award-winning films early in his career, it was after the revolution that he earned a formidable reputation on the stage of world cinema, where his groundbreaking debut feature was Report in 1977. His masterpiece Close Up was made in 1990 and later The Poetic Life and Nothing More, that was a 1992 film, led to Kiarostami's discovery in the West. The West discovered him. He won the Certain Regard Award at Cannes. The fact that Iranian cinema is considered one of the finest in the world is largely due to the efforts of Kiarostami. I just mentioned Jafar Panahi's The White Balloon, which is a 95 movie. So, the film describes in real time the adventures of the word is real time adventures of a 7-year-old girl and her older brother in the streets of Tehran in 85 minutes. The little girl sets off to buy a goldfish for herself. On her way to the market, she loses her banknote and most of the film is devoted to her attempts to get her money back. The film is also notable for its well sketched characters, the child's perception of time passing and the snobbery of the bourgeoisie. Jafar Panahi's recent film Taxi stars Panahi himself as a taxi driver. So, this is again a common practice among Iranian filmmakers. They make films starring themselves. It helps them cut costs and it also helps in what I was just talking about, self-reflexivity factor, drawing attention to the cinematic process. So, it stars Panahi as a taxi driver ferrying a series of characters around Tehran. Again, it has politically charged content like his 2006 film Offside, which depicts a group of football mad schoolgirls trying to catch a World Cup qualifier despite women not being allowed into the stadium. Taxi features a storyline about a woman jailed for trying to watch a men's volleyball match. The Legend of Sai, which is a 91 movie, it is a feminist film by Tamine Milani. It draws on the literature of Azerbaijan province. According to the legend, Ah is a handsome young man who materializes to help those in need whenever he hears a heartfelt sigh. Milani's protagonist is a woman novelist suffering from writer's block who, with the help of Ah, experiences the lives of 4 women from different strata. From a wealthy Tehrani who feels unfulfilled by her life, to a poor servant, to a Turkmen wife unable to leave the house without her husband's permission, to a rebellious student, the film offers a fascinating portrayal of a range of Iranian women and their specific problems. Here is a scene from The Legend of a Sai. Abbas Kiarostami's 1990 film Close Up is based on a real incident. At first, it appears as a documentary of events leading to the trial of Hossein Sabzian for attempted fraud. The characters in the film are played by Kiarostami himself, Makhmalbaf, and real tabloid journalists, journalists who are always on a lookout for a scoop. At the core, the film is an investigation to explore the phenomenon of the truth, and Kiarostami rightly points out that in order to reveal truth, one has to resort to lying. Here is a scene from Close Up. I have been telling you about Kiarostami's A Taste of Cherry, which is a 1997 film. It was a much appreciated film. It is about a man called Badi. He is very elegant. He is driving around in the desert landscape in his car, a Range Rover. Now, his problem is something very peculiar. He wants to commit suicide, and he is looking for someone to help him in his burial. So, the plan is he will kill himself. He has already prepared a grave for himself. The idea is that the man who helps him has to cover his dead body. The hero, our hero, will just kill himself, lie down in the grave, and the helper's help is needed so that he can come and cover the dead body and perform the appropriate rites. That is all he needs, and there will be some amount of money waiting for him in the car. Now, Badi never behaves in an obviously despairing or miserable manner as one would expect him to. There are no cries or tears or lamentations, and he never reveals the reason for his desire to commit suicide. There is no music. The film has a very rough picture and sound, almost in the tradition of Italian neorealism. The acting again is largely non-professional, and the film has a documentary feel. The strong imagery in his films can be attributed to the fact that Kiarostami, who works in photography, which he exhibits in international venues such as Venice Biennale. So, he is a filmmaker, he is a distinguished photographer as well. He holds his own exhibitions at international venues. So, therefore, the deep sense of imagery in Kiarostami's work. Kiarostami also cites the influences of international filmmakers such as Jacques Tati, Roberto Rossellini, Robert Bresson and Andrei Tarkovsky. He is one of the most highly regarded filmmakers from across the world. Generally shoots his films without a formal screenplay. Again, so much like Italian neorealists and French New Wave filmmakers. His films often assume a semi-documentary form where he seems to state that fiction is not reality and reality is not fiction. The Wind Will Carry Us is again a major film by Kiarostami. It is a 1999 film. The film borrows its title from a poem by the controversial Iranian artist Farrokhzad, who preached progressive political and feminist doctrine. In this film, the poem is recited by the unnamed male protagonist, who is an engineer and photographer, as he attempts to build a telecommunication plant in some rural area of Iran. Being a journalist and a photographer, he is also interested in covering a feature story about an extremely old woman. So, he is waiting for her to die so that he can capture the mourning rituals among the villagers. It so happens that the woman does not die and the hero does not get his story. There is also a scene where he attempts to seduce a young village girl. He is preoccupied with notions of transience and temporality, and the film is a study in contrast, reflects the villagers' unsettlement by modernity. The village, again there is a dichotomy between the village and the city as embodied in the engineer, the ancient and the modern, curiosity and the concealment of it. So, the hero is a specialist in modern communication. He is an engineer after all. However, his way of communication is impossible here in the village. So, again our attention is being drawn to the fact that one has to walk an extra mile in order to communicate with people who have been left behind by the forces of modernity. So, I have been talking about Taste of Cherry by Kiarostami. Here is a scene from Taste of Cherry. So, again we have been talking where the wind will take us, a taste of cherry. So, the car motif appears again in 10, which is a 2002 road movie again by Kiarostami, that follows 10 conversations that take place in a car as the car is driven through the streets of Tehran. Where is the Friend's House is the title of a 1987 film by Abbas Kiarostami. It is again a child's story. This is important to note that many of recent Iranian films are post-revolution Iranian films have children as protagonists, probably because such subjects are less likely to involve social restrictions than would stories about adult men and women. So, it is a gently humorous film about children's loyalty towards each other. In the small village of Kokar, Ahmad Ahmadpur and Mohammad Raza, these are our young heroes. They are sitting in the local school room, which is a boys only school, and they are listening to the stern admonitions of their teacher, who is very strict. Raza has not been doing his homework because of family problems, and he comes to the class without doing his school work, without his school book. He is warned that one more such violation and he will be expelled. When the school bell rings and the boys run outside, Mohammad Raza drops his workbook, and in the commotion that follows, Ahmad mistakenly goes home with his as well as his friend's workbook. Now, Kiarostami then follows Ahmad's journey in finding Raza's home, therefore, the title, Where is the Friend's Home? Majid Majidi is another important filmmaker. His debut as a director and screenwriter is marked by a film called Baduk, B-A-D-U-K, in 1992. That was presented at Cannes Festival and it won several awards nationwide. Since then, he has written and directed several films that have won international recognition. His most notable film is Children of Heaven, a 1997 film that won the Best Picture at Montreal International Film Award, and it was also nominated for Best Foreign Film at the Oscar Academy Awards. The Children of Heaven is concerned with a 9-year-old boy Ali and his 7-year-old sister Zahra, who live with their parents in a meager one-room flat in South Tehran. Ali has been sent to have his sister's shoes repaired, but on the way home, the repaired shoes are mistakenly taken away by a city rag picker while Ali is shopping for some groceries. Now, this establishes the problem that drives the rest of the action. Ali is horrified by having lost the shoes, knowing that his family cannot afford to replace them and that he will be severely punished for his error. He and his sister take the only option that appears because they attend school at different times. They must share Ali's sneakers without telling their parents. The film can be seen in the tradition of the neorealist cinema of Vittorio De Sica's Bicycle Thieves and also Satyajit Ray's Pather Panchali. Here is a scene from The Children of Heaven. So, despite the restrictions imposed by the fundamentalist regime, most Iranian cinema has managed to find a distinct voice in world cinema and is making profound comments on the human condition. From Iranian cinema, I would also like to give you a quick overview of the cinema from the Middle East, and this part of the world has also been making several important films. In recent times, the tensions between Israel and Palestine has given birth to some of the best films to come from that region. Elias Suleiman's divine intervention in 2002 reflects at the situation at an Israeli-Palestinian checkpoint, and it's dealt with black humor. There is another film called The Syrian Bride, which is also set in no man's land between checkpoints of Israel and Syria. There is a filmmaker, Amos Gitai, who made Free Zone, in which three women, an American, an Israeli and a Palestinian, they become traveling companions in Jordan. Thirst is another great movie by Tawfiq Abu Well. It is about an Arab family living in an abandoned village in a dusty corner of Israel. So, great cinema from different parts of the world, and this was in continuation with our discussion of traditions in world cinema. So, please take a quick look at the reading list, not too much. So, thank you very much.